Hello, I'm Mark Price. I'd like to talk to you today about answering the call. In today's readings, we hear about Isaiah answering the call, the disciples answering the call. So today's message is answering the call. But first, there was a fellow who was fishing. He was a good fisherman. It's a lot like a brother-in-law I have who can fish and catch fish anywhere. I think that if there's a rain that night and there's a puddle the next morning, he's going to catch a fish. He's going to get out there with his line. Somehow he's going to catch a fish in that puddle. He can catch a fish wherever he is. Amazing. So this man's out fishing and people are watching him because he's reeling in one fish after another. And they're amazed because he seems to measure the fish. And if they're 8 inches or less, he keeps the fish. But if they're bigger than 8 inches, he throws them back. And this doesn't make sense because most people, they keep the bigger fish. So somebody went over to him and says, why do you keep throwing the big fish back and you're keeping the smaller ones? And the man looked, he says, well, my frying pan is only 8 inches big. So God tells us to get a bigger frying pan. This man was limiting his catch by the size of his pan. God says, get a bigger frying pan. Everything is possible with me. So again, the readings today are about answering the call. The first reading from Isaiah, we hear this amazing vision that Isaiah has. Isaiah sees himself in this vision. He's before God and all of the heavenly hosts there, and they're singing these praises to God. Holy, holy, glory to God. And he's amazed, but he's feeling frightened because he knows he's a sinner, and he knows that he has many faults, and he feels that, well, I'm here maybe because they're going to kill me. And he's scared and he's frightened. And all of a sudden, he starts to say to himself, why would you have me here? Did you bring me here just to kill me? And then all of a sudden, an angel comes over to him and with a hot coal touches his mouth. And he says, I have just taken away your sin. Your sin has been removed. You see, God did not call Isaiah there to kill him, but rather to forgive him. And that's what God does to all of us. God takes us with our faults, our shortcomings, and our sins, and if we're willing to go before God, if we're willing to embrace God, God will forgive us. And that is the message that Isaiah got. And once he realized that God didn't want to kill him, that he wanted to save him, he wanted to forgive him, then he hollered out, he cried out, here I am, Lord, send me. So he accepted the call of God and he said, here I am, I'm ready, send me. Whenever I hear those words, here I am, Lord, I always think of the song by the same name. I think the song came out maybe around 80 or 81. And about that time, I was invited to speak at a mission, a parish mission in Missouri. I think it was Florissant, Missouri. And I spoke at the mission, and before I went up to speak, the choir sang that song, Here I Am, Lord. And this is, like I say, early 80s. And no one sang with the choir sang by themselves. And I was sort of surprised because this was a song that I loved. It was a song that spoke to my heart. It was a song that really resonated within me. And I was surprised that no one sang it. And so when I went up to speak, the first thing I did after introducing myself was I sort of lightly, fun way, I guess, chastised them. I said, that was a beautiful song and none of you sang with it. Well, after the night of the mission, the pastor said to me, he says, you shouldn't have chastised my congregation. He says, we just learned that song. It had just gotten to their church. Their first time they ever heard it was that night. So I learned my lesson. Keep your mouth shut. You can love what you love, but don't expect other people to love the same thing. So it's a beautiful song, but I learned my lesson. By the way, something else happened at that mission. The crucifix I have behind me was a gift from the pastor of that church in Florissant, Missouri. He made it, and he gave it to me as a gift for being there for the parish mission. And I've always treasured that crucifix. So anyway, the first reading today is from Isaiah. He accepted the call, and he said, send me, dear Lord, send me. Here I am. The second reading from St. Paul's first letter to the Corinthians, we hear him tell the story of Jesus' death, burial, and resurrection. He's saying that is the foundation for our faith. The fact that Jesus came to this earth, he allowed himself to be crucified, to die. He was buried, and on the third day he rose again from the dead, as he said he would. He rose from the dead as he predicted and prophesied he would do. So Paul is saying this is the foundation for our faith. And then he goes on to talk about meeting Jesus on that road to Damascus and how it changed his life and how it took him, a sinner, somebody who had persecuted the church, and it was by the grace of God that he was changed. You see, God calls us, he changes us, not because we're perfect, not because we're good, but because he knows our heart. He doesn't look at our failings, doesn't look at our shortcomings, but looks at our heart. There's a story I've told many times about a boy about 11 years old. He was born without a right arm. And he went to his parents one day and said, "Mom, Dad, all my friends are doing sports, so I'd kind of like to get into a sport." His parents loved him, and they said, "Well, what sport did you have in mind?" And the boy says, "Well, I've been thinking I'd like to do judo." And the parents said, "Well, judo is a great sport," but they told him, "I don't know if it's the best sport for a young boy missing their right arm." And the boy did what kids do. "Please, please, please, please." And the parents said, "Yes, we'll try. We'll look into finding a coach for you." And they found a coach. And the boy started practicing one day a week, week after week after week with this coach. But that coach, every single practice, every single time they got together, was teaching him one move, only one judo move. Week after week after week, only one judo move. Well, after many months, the boy was put into a competition. And you know, he won the competition. And he went to the second round. He went to the second round and he won the second round. He went to the third round. He won the third round. He got to the semifinals. He won the semifinals. And he got to the finals. And in the final match, he won. And no one was more shocked than this boy. And he went to his coach. He said, "How did that happen?" He says, "How did I win? You only taught me one move." And the coach says, "Yes, son, but I taught you the most important move and most difficult move in all of judo. And the only way for your opponent to defeat you is to take hold of your right arm." You see, that coach, like God, didn't look at the boy's shortcomings, didn't look at the things he didn't have, but looked at his heart, looked at who he was, and looked at what he did have. God focuses on what we did have. Isaiah had failings, shortcomings. God saw the real Isaiah, and that's why he was called. Paul had shortcomings, failings. God called him because God knew the heart of Paul, knew who he really was. And that's the same with us. So in the gospel today, we hear the famous story of Simon Peter. It's really the call of the first disciples to follow Jesus. And so we learn in today's gospel that Peter had been out fishing all night and came back with nothing. They caught nothing all night long, and then Jesus sends them back out and tells them how to go out now to the center of the lake and how to draw. Well, why am I trying to tell you this? I'll have my friend Simon Peter. He was there. He'll tell you what it was like that day when Jesus sent him back out.
And I went back to Lake Gennesaret, and I was on the shore, and what was I doing? I hope no one said fishing. I was there, I was repairing my nets. And this day I'm down and I'm working on the nets, and I'm working very hard. And all of a sudden, I remember I looked up, and standing right there in front of me was Jesus. May I tell you something about Jesus? He was the quietest walker of anyone I ever knew. No, I used to say to my friends, "Be careful what you're saying. Jesus might be standing right next to you." And I looked up and I said to him, "Rabbi, what is it you're doing here?" And he asked this question. He asked, "How long were you fishing, and how well did you fish last night?" And I looked and I said, "Well, don't ask. Rabbi," I said, "don't even ask." I said, "I don't want to tell you." I said, "It was the worst night I can remember. I don't in my life, I don't remember. Don't even ask. I don't want to tell you." I said, "I was out all night and caught next to nothing." I said, my friends and we caught next to, don't even ask me. I don't want to tell you." Well, Jesus said this. He said, "I'd like you to take those nets that you're working on and put them back out onto your boat, And he says, I want you to take your boat and push it out and go to the center of the lake. And he says, then I want you to take your nets. And he asked me this question. He asked, what side do you throw your nets off? And I said, well, we fishermen, we throw them off the left side of the boat. He said, yes, of course. He says, here's what I want you to do. He said, I want you to take your nets and I want you to throw them off the right side of the boat. I would come to find with Jesus, he was oft times asking me to do things a little differently than I was used to. Well, when he had finished, I looked at him and I said this. I said, Jesus, I said, I can certainly see that you are a carpenter because you know absolutely nothing about fishing. I said, for example, you do not go out at this time of day. Anyone who fishes knows you don't go out late morning or early afternoon. There are no fish. I told Jesus you don't catch fish at this time. It's the fish are doing other things, I said to him. You don't catch fish at this time of day. And second, you never go to the center of the lake. You go to the sides and the inlets like this. This is where you catch fish. I've been fishing all my life. I said, you don't catch fish at the center of the lake. No fisherman ever fishes at the center of the lake. And I said, lastly, you always throw your nets off the left side of the boat. And I said, and there's an important reason for that. Tradition. It's a tradition. You throw them off the left. Well, I learned something of Jesus. The more you argue with him, the more he just stands there and looks at you. Gives you plenty of time to realize that he might be right. Well, I got tired of hearing myself talk, and so I said, fine, I'll do it. And I remember I gathered the nets, and I put them out onto the boat, and I'm pushing the boat out, and the whole time I'm mumbling under my breath. I won't tell you what I was saying. But I went out for one reason and one reason alone. Do you know what it was? To prove him wrong. God help me. To prove him wrong. Well, I got out to the center of the lake and I took my nets, and out of habit I began to throw them off the left. I said, the fisherman said throw them off the right. So I took my nets and I threw them off the right side of the boat. Do you know what happened, my beloved? It was as if the nets themselves were bait. Never in my life had I seen such a thing. The fish swam to them as I had never seen. I had to call to my friends, James and John. I said, come and help. They brought their 2 boats. Do you know that we filled 3 boats to over capacity? Never had I seen such a thing. I got back to shore, I ran to Jesus, and I dropped down to my knees, and I said, please forgive me. Please forgive me, for I am a sinful man. Well, Jesus put his hands onto my shoulders, and he helped me to stand. And then he asked me this question. He said, Simon Peter, son of John, will you come and follow me? Well, I looked at him and I said, yes, I will follow you. And then he went on, he said, I will make you a fisher of men. Fisher of men. I had no idea what he meant. Throwing nets on people. Well, Romans didn't they?
Well, there you have it. Simon Peter, in his own words, telling you about Jesus, after a night of fishing and catching next to nothing, sends them back out and what the results were. So what's our lesson from all this in our readings today? There are 3. First, we must listen to God. We must be open in our minds and our hearts to listen to God. Listen to God as God speaks to us. Listen to God as God is calling us. Remember, God doesn't speak really in the big things all the time. He speaks in the little things, that simple voice. Elijah talks about going to the side of the mountain looking for God and the lightning and the earthquakes. But where does he find God? In the gentle breeze. So first we must listen for God speaking in our life, speaking in our hearts, giving us the direction to follow in our own lives. Listen for God. And then when God speaks to us and we discern this is God, then we have to respond to God. Do as God calls us to do. Peter didn't want to go back out and try fishing again. He saw Jesus as a carpenter. What did he know about fishing? But he finally said, yes, I'm going to respond. I'm going to do as he says. I'm going to see whether it was because he wanted to prove Jesus wrong, or he really wanted to see, who is this new teacher, this rabbi, this person from Galilee. I want to go in and listen to him. And so he responded by going out and doing what Jesus asked him to do, even throwing the nets off the specific side that Jesus asked, even though that wasn't his normal way of doing things. So Peter listened, then Peter responded. And then the last thing we're to do is to follow. First listen, then respond, and then when we know it's God, then we follow him. We devote our lives to him. You know, there's a lot of reasons I should maybe stop being involved in ministry. After all, I've had multiple heart attacks. I've had multiple strokes. They left me paralyzed. They left me with an inability to speak for a while. And yet, I kept coming back. I kept coming back. I was in that horrible rollover accident where I broke every bone in my neck. All my vertebrates are broken. They're fused. And yet, I don't quit. I come back. Why? Because when God calls you, he's not calling you because you're perfect. He's not calling you because you have this ability or that ability. He's not calling you because you can do this or you can do that. He's calling you because he sees your heart, and he knows there's something in your heart that he wants the world to see. So that's why no matter who you are, no matter what gift you have, no matter how bad you think you've been, listen for God, respond to God, and then follow God. God's grace will be all that you need. We want to be people who, in our lives, after listening and responding and following him, we are always willing and able to say, here I am, Lord, send me. Here I am, Lord, send me. Amen? This is Mark Price. Thanks for listening.